The summer of 1975 was supposed to be endless, filled with the loud, bright freedom of youth. But for the small, unassuming town of Crestwood, North Carolina, it ended abruptly on a humid July afternoon. Evelyn Reed, a bright 19-year-old college student home for the break, never came back from her part-time job at the local library. The discovery of her body 3 days later, hidden near the old abandoned railway tracks, didn't just shock the community, it paralyzed it. The crime scene was a detective's nightmare: sparse, degraded evidence, a lack of eyewitnesses, and a population too small to hold secrets, yet too terrified to speak. Detective Sergeant Marcus Thorne, a young, eager investigator at the time, made a promise to Evelyn's parents. He'd find the person who did this. But the leads quickly ran dry, the case file grew thick, and the killer vanished into the fabric of the community, leaving behind only the chilling quiet of an unsolved murder. The case went cold, the file relegated to a dusty shelf, becoming a constant, painful reminder of justice denied. The 1975 investigation was a testament to grit and manpower, but it was fighting with analog tools. Detectives meticulously canvassed every house near the railway line, interviewed hundreds of people, and even drained a small creek based on a tenuous tip. They had a few pieces of crucial evidence: Evelyn's clothing, trace fibers, and, most importantly, a biological sample collected at the scene. This sample, a few drops of what they knew was the suspect's blood, was preserved in the best way 1970s forensics allowed. However, without a national DNA database like CODIS, that sample was just a number in a logbook. They had no name to connect it to. Every unsuspect profile they built, the drifter, the disgruntled co-worker, the local heavy, failed to match the limited forensic clues. Sergeant Thorne retired years later, the case still heavy on his mind. The file, known simply as the Reed case, became shorthand for the limits of old-school police work. Decades passed. Crestwood slowly rebuilt its confidence, but the fear lingered like a low fog. In 2023, a new generation of investigators, led by Detective Sarah Chen, decided to pull the Reed case file. Chen, specializing in cold case forensics, wasn't interested in the old paper leads. She was interested in the physical evidence, specifically that decades-old biological sample. The sample was retested using modern techniques, successfully isolating a full DNA profile of the killer. This profile was then submitted to the national CODIS database. The result? Nothing. The killer hadn't committed a felony since 1975. Or at least nothing that put his DNA into the system. It was a partial victory, confirming their killer's identity was not a known felon, but still leaving them without a name. Chen knew they needed to step out of the law enforcement databases and enter a new frontier: genetic genealogy. Genetic genealogy is the science of using consumer DNA databases to find relatives of an unknown DNA sample. Detective Chen partnered with a specialized forensic lab and a genetic genealogist, Dr. Alistair Finch. The killer's DNA profile was carefully uploaded to a public genealogy database, following strict legal and privacy protocols. The system immediately spit back a list of matches, not the killer himself, but his distant relatives. A third cousin, a second cousin once removed, and several fourth cousins. It was the investigative equivalent of finding a single thread in a massive tapestry. The killer was somewhere in the branches of these family trees. Dr. Finch's task was clear: to take these disparate matches and, using birth records, obituaries, census data, and marriage licenses, painstakingly build the killer's family tree back to a common ancestor, then track it forward to the potential suspect. The work was slow, painstaking, and required absolute precision. Dr. Finch and Detective Chen started with the common great-great-grandparents shared by the DNA matches. They mapped out hundreds of descendants, narrowing the focus to one branch of the tree that had deep roots in Crestwood County. They began to eliminate individuals. Women were ruled out, as were men whose birth or death dates contradicted the 1975 timeline. The process was like solving a multi-generational riddle. Every birth, death, and marriage certificate was a puzzle piece. Finally, the search narrowed to 3 men who fit the profile, lived in Crestwood in 1975, were of the correct age, and were direct descendants of the common ancestor. One name in particular kept resurfacing: Arthur Vance Yabos, a man who'd been living quietly in a nearby town for decades. Arthur Vance was a ghost in the original 1975 police files. He was never interviewed. He wasn't a close acquaintance of Evelyn's. He was just a delivery driver who worked a few blocks from the library. The genealogists had provided the who, but the detectives still needed the corroboration. A surveillance team was immediately deployed. The goal wasn't to secure a confession, but a discarded DNA sample, a final irrefutable link. After 2 tense weeks, Vance tossed a used coffee cup and a cigarette butt into a public trash receptacle. The investigators moved in, retrieving the items immediately. The clock was ticking as the evidence was rushed to the state crime lab for the final comparison. The tension in the cold case unit was palpable. This was the moment of truth, 48 years in the making. The call came back at 03:20 a.m. Detective Chen stared at the computer screen, the words searing into her mind. Match confirmed, probability 1 in 700 quintillion. The DNA from the discarded coffee cup was a definitive match to the degraded biological sample found at Evelyn Reed's crime scene in 1975. Arthur Vance was the killer. The silence in the unit was deafening, a sound of decades of unsolved grief finally being broken. The cold case wasn't just solved. It was closed by a technology no one could have dreamed of when Evelyn was murdered. The investigative team spent the next 48 hours assembling the full case file for the prosecutor, detailing the genetic genealogy timeline, and the forensic match, a mountain of evidence that was now utterly inescapable for the unsuspecting suspect. The arrest was executed with quiet, cold efficiency just before dawn. Arthur Vance, now a respected retiree, was taken into custody without incident at his home. The news hit Crestwood like a seismic shockwave. People who had lived in fear and speculation for half a century suddenly had a name, a face, and a local link to the terror. Neighbors expressed disbelief. Friends swore he was a gentle man. That's the nature of these hidden truths. The killer is often not the monster on the periphery, but the quiet figure living among us. For Evelyn Reed's family, the arrest was an overwhelming, complex mix of relief and renewed pain. The decades of unanswered questions were over, replaced by the grim reality of a trial, but also the promise of final justice. The solution to the 1975 murder of Evelyn Reed became a national headline, not just for the arrest, but for how the case was solved. This case underscored the transformative power of forensic genetic genealogy, a method that has become the single greatest force in closing decades-old cold cases. It doesn't rely on luck, confession, or human memory. It relies on the irrefutable map of human biology. It's a technology that ensures that as long as a single piece of viable DNA is preserved, no case is ever truly hopeless, and no killer can remain anonymous forever. This scientific breakthrough forces communities and investigators to re-examine every single cold case file, knowing that justice may be just one family tree away. The evidence against Arthur Vance was overwhelming, and faced with the irrefutable DNA match and the meticulous genetic genealogy timeline, he eventually entered a plea, sparing Evelyn's family the trauma of a full trial. He was sentenced to life imprisonment, ensuring he would spend the rest of his days accountable for the life he took in 1975. For Detective Chen, the case was the realization of a duty owed to a former colleague and a promise kept to a grieving family. The decades-long shadow over Crestwood finally lifted. Evelyn Reed's story, once a tragedy defined by an unknown attacker, is now a powerful testament to persistence, science, and the enduring human quest for closure. The message is clear. The cold case unit might move slowly, but it never forgets. Justice, though delayed by 50 years, was ultimately served,